Awesome. Well, I'm glad two things. If you ever recorded on Zoom, I'm glad that it doesn't scream at you like it used to. Recording is in progress. They toned that one down.
Yeah, they did.
I really toned that down. But thank you, Elias, for coming on to the show. Uh, I didn't learn your name until like 2 minutes ago, so that's pretty cool because you've been Kino Native on YouTube, and then you now changed your name to Native Media Theory.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have you on the podcast because you have a fantastic YouTube channel. And what I tell people is if you want to be educated, you go to his channel, and you want to be entertained, somewhat entertained, you should come to mine because yours comes from a place of like, holy shit, the level of research and I say research, I don't say that loosely. Like he's not looking at YouTube stuff. Like this guy is like going hard into like literal like peer-reviewed articles. He's digging into like history of like where we ended up today of Native representation. And I did that from my context of, just kind of my own personal experience, Dinkin and Duncan research. But I've seen his channel and he talks about it from the context of like pre-film and television of like really colonizers, settlers experiences of like the writings of their, basically from first contact on of like how did people describe natives when they first started seeing them, and how does that frame our perceptions of what they turn into? How does that turn us into viewing them as the villain in the way of westward expansion, things that we need to view them as less than human? And so if you want to be entertained and educated, please go to his YouTube channel. So thank you, Elias, for coming on.
Yeah, of course, and glad to be here.
Yeah, so let's get started with just talking a little bit about background of you, because you clearly are a filmmaker, or at least have that in your blood, and you clearly are educated in that. So why don't you talk about your background a little bit?
Yeah. So like you, I Navajo. I grew up on the reservation and Shiprock, that area,
Nice.
Four Corners, and films were always a big part of my life. My mom and I bonded over films. Like I grew up watching kind of your cliche 80s genre films like Jurassic Park and Conan the Barbarian and all
Predator.
these
Yep.
Predator. Yep. And I actually, like, through these films, I actually got closer to my extended family members, like my cousins and all
Right.
my aunties and uncles. We bonded over watching these movies at night and stuff like that. I come from, my mother is a teacher, but my dad, he was an artist and stuff like that. He a very craft oriented person, and I myself am an artist as well. But it wasn't until like maybe high school where I kind of solidified the fact that, like, I want to make films or do something in the realm of film. So I went to school, and I that's what I majored in, was media arts studies, and
Nice.
my
Where'd you go?
minor, BYU here in
Okay.
Utah,
Nice.
and my minor is in American Indian Studies. So this YouTube channel is literally like a combination of those things, looking
Nice.
at those things combined. And my emphasis was in directing and writing,
Okay.
and so that's kind of like, my ambitions are to actually go into that later, and I'm actively trying to do that now. And like, I have made things, some school things. Oops, sorry, some school things, and then like kind of my own projects, and I'm
Right.
hoping to just do stuff and
That's awesome.
just further indigenous representation. So I figured one of the best ways for me to kind of contribute to it is by actively being involved in it, but also actively being involved in the kind of the talking space around it. Because
Amazing.
you were the only person that I've seen actively like going out and like talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing that I've seen was maybe like that, the Real Engine documentary, and then maybe like social media places like Illuminative,
Right.
and that's really it. I haven't seen someone actively like following these things. Social media was the only space I could find where people were actively talking about it.
Outside of November, you don't see a whole lot of attention.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
and so I just hit a year yesterday on this podcast, and
Congrats.
hey, thanks. It's I hit 42 episodes in a year, so I was 10 under my goal, but I'm so excited to be doing this. When I first started it, I did it because I don't know how much you know about the show or the origin, but I kind of just talked about watching Parasite. I was watching Parasite, and I'm like, that's in. If you've seen that, like the weird, out of nowhere, the kid has a teepees, and he has a bunch of like kind of
Mm-hmm.
native decor in his room. I'm like, this is in Korea. What is going on? This is South Korea. What's
Mm-hmm.
happening? And the one of the ending scenes where they have like the dad, I guess both the dads, they kind of have a standoff. They're like staging a cowboys and Indians kind of scene, and they have headdresses on, and it's just like I watched it, and I mean, Parasite is just kind of like a trip on its own. So like the second time I watched it, I really paid attention on that, and I googled, Native American representation in Parasite, and I found like one article, and I found like one snippet of an interview where Bong Joon Ho like talked about it. But other than that, it was like I was like, no one's talking about this, and I love podcasts, and I went down the podcast rabbit hole and tried to find people talking about it. Every Parasite recap, film review I listened to, nobody mentioned it. They were like, oh, that was kind
Mm-hmm.
of weird, and that was it. And so, same as you, nobody was talking about this. And at the time, there was just Skoda and Cinema was the only podcast that
Yeah.
was out there, and he had like one episode out, and his was like I chatted with him on Instagram. He was going in a way different direction than I was. So I'm like, great, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. And yeah, so here we are a year later. I just wanted to talk about to me the exciting bits of representation aren't necessarily Reservation Dogs. I mean, this is
Yeah.
awesome, but I loved it like Parasite, Zombieland, Back to the Future 3, things like what you in your channel, you talk about wanting to do all media. Like that includes video games, television, I'm just assuming even fashion. And it always fascinated me. It's like you have, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Killer Instinct. They all have a native fighter, and it's just like, where does this all come from? And I think people can learn some of that from, I think, both of our channels, but I think especially yours because you give it historical context.
Yeah, I mean, I try. the
No,
history
you do a great
the
job.
history part is more of like I kind of have to force myself to do it, but because I understand that it's important. But the main reason I appeal to the history thing is one because I'm personally curious about the origins of where these things come from, and
Mhm.
the origins of why they are. And unfortunately, sometimes you can't really find a reason. Sometimes it's just in the subconscious ether of Western culture. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, but I also realized too, like already looking at the people who follow me in my channel, they're mostly non-native, which is interesting.
Yep.
And
Same.
I've noticed that non-native folks, they value like I don't want to say cold hard facts, but they value kind of context
Mhm.
when it comes to explanation of things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
I
but
think
yeah,
that's where our channels differ too. It's like I've made so many comments on my show, other podcasts, that the only negative feedback I get, especially long-winded negative feedback, is from white people. Like it's from non-natives, and
yeah,
I'm not like assuming. Like they tell me, like, oh, I'm not native, but and here they give me like this long-winded answer about how my claims are unfounded, or how I'm ignorant, or how I'm too broad brushing too much. And I'm kind of
yeah,
unapologetic in the sense that like I'm a res kid. I'm just giving my information, like I'm college educated, but it's not like I'm like digging into these matter. I'm not like reading peer reviewed articles and digging into academic journals all the time, like consistently educating myself on the issue. I'm just providing my perspective with the level of research that I'm providing. If that perspective isn't for you, there's other material for you to consume. Whereas you have kind of like took it on the other way. It's just like, well, I'll curate my content for my viewers. And I appreciate that, because it's like I almost had this like mindset of scarcity when I first saw your channel. I was just like, oh shit, another one. Like thinking like immediately of like, oh god, there's another one to like take. It's just like this mindset of scarcity. It's like so toxic in Indian country. But now that we've both kind of matured a little bit in our channels, we're like, we're doing the same thing, but it's very different.
yeah. I've already gotten some blowback already because I made a comment about I made my review of Reservation Dogs, and I've noticed that was the one comment. The feedback I had was mostly from natives, where
Mm-hmm.
I assumed, and this was honestly my own fault. Like the deer lady in
Mm-hmm.
Reservation Dogs, I didn't know she was native. I
You thought she
literally
was
had no
white?
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just passed my comment. I was like, oh, I thought it was interesting that she was played by a white woman. And then
Mm-hmm.
like I got so many comments and DMs about it. They're like, "Don't you understand that she's Mohawk?" Blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And I was like, I had literally had no idea who she was. Hey,
And
but guess what?
it's
Now I know though. Now I
yeah.
know who she is. I follow her on Instagram, and like now I can really
Mhm.
follow people like her and stuff like that.
I think that's it's important for us too to take the good with the bad. Some of the feedback I've gotten from non-natives, it's been very insightful, for me,
Yeah.
because it's like I don't want to alienate people at the same time. It's like, well, my perspective is my perspective, and you have to, respect it for what it is. Like, I'm not out to like, create a divide, be like, you can only listen if you're native. And I've gotten that email or response a lot. Like, I'm not native. Is it okay if I listen to your show? And I'm just like, yeah, you can listen to it. It's like, really, if you enjoy it, you're entertained by it, keep listening. I think what's fascinating to me is that nobody wants to talk about this on a regular basis, and there's so much of it out there. And I get floods, and I'm sure you have at times of like, hey, you should talk about, and everybody has a suggestion. And they're rarely the same. I mean, they'll be like Smoke Signals, Dances with Wolves, but then you'll get like these really, really nuanced stuff. Like, hey, you ever heard of My Wife and Kids, that TV show? Like, there's native representation in that. And they'll
Yeah,
throw out
yeah.
these Canadian shows, or these movies that have real subtle representation. Like The Prophecy, the Christopher Walken movie, and I'm just like, what is going on? Like, it's
Or like
everywhere.
the alien, what's it, that the alien show on
Resident
sci-fi.
Alien. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
scene in there about like, the alien is a little offended that people are running around as aliens.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the writers on that show, Tasba Chavez, she's native.
Yeah.
She's and that has heavy representation. It's got Gary Farmer in it, for crying out loud. And so
Yeah.
it's got Eugene Brave Rock in it, and like there's a hunger for this kind of like perspective. And that's
Yep.
why, like, when I see you doing what you're doing, like, it's really impressive, because one, it's on YouTube. I mean, I have like basically audio only YouTube, and I'll like post the interviews video, but that's just not my forte. Like, podcast is what I wanted to do, and that's what I've been doing. And I really appreciate your perspective, because it's so, like I said, it's so researched, but it's so different than mine. And we're both Navajo kids too, like from the res.
Hmm.
And so I think it's really interesting that, like, we're just both college educated. You would think like, oh, they have similar experiences, but you went to BYU, and you had made a comment of how you got into film, and you couldn't engage with you basically couldn't have discourse specifically around this kind of representation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, like, so I think I am like one of three native students to graduate from my program at BYU. I mean, it's BYU. It's
The
like
film program.
95%
Mm-hmm.
white, yeah. And the film program specifically, and I know them.
Mm-hmm.
um
Yeah.
and it was always interesting because like in that program over at BYU, there is a hunger for um people wanting to reach further out into like representation of different types of people, right? But the problem is they don't have enough of those people.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess for me it was just part of it was just logistical. Like I got in the program late, and so I was like, taking high level classes and entry level classes at the same time.
Yep. Been
um
there.
and part of it was just like I was kind of learning as I was going. And I guess like I look back now, I was like, I wish I could have probably took more initiative to make more native themed stuff. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? While I was in school. And I guess, I only had like maybe two professors out of all of them who were very tuned to like what I wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is like, they're not native. And I feel like they were too afraid to kind of provide more insight because I don't know, like I think they were just a little like afraid of being like not PC enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just a little difficult for me to try to like, I was the only one, navigating this issue. And even in my minor program, I really wanted to do like a whole
Because you were
course.
you were NAS minor, you right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
You want to do a whole
even
course? You wanted to create one,
yeah,
or?
yeah, yeah. So like we had an option to actually create a course, which was actually really cool.
Yep. Yep.
And I wanted to do it specifically about literature. But just logistically it didn't work out. So like now I feel like I'm kind of this YouTube channel thing is allowing me to kind of expand what I wish I could have done further while I was in school. And I mean, I value the education I got. Like I learned a lot, especially with film history. Film
Mm-hmm.
history, I believe is really important, especially when it comes to in regards to representation of not just natives, but like everyone else.
Right.
And I think I value that, and I value kind of a lot of the theoretical things that I learned, and
Mm-hmm.
the actual experience of being on set and making stuff. Even now in my job, I'm constantly around that kind of creative space and doing, creative work. Um, yeah, but I guess this YouTube thing is just allowing me to kind of extend that part of my education. So yeah, and I'm hoping to go further. There aren't a lot of scholars when it comes to this. I
Yeah.
think in the country there's probably maybe a handful of professors in universities or anywhere really who actively are like I would say like specifically scholars about indigenous cinema or
Yeah.
indigenous representation. You know what I mean? It's just
Right.
it's not really a thing.
So I think
Um,
that's where like our experiences are a little different in that my NAS program. I mean, I went to Dartmouth specifically because there was a significant like native population. I mean, significant for an Ivy League. There's like more natives at Dartmouth than the other Ivy Leagues combined. It's like over 100
yeah,
of us,
wasn't it specifically like targeted towards natives back in the day?
Yeah, when it was founded,
Yeah.
Samson Occam founded it for native education, and then it turned into
Hmm.
Ivy League University down the road, or college rather. And yeah, it's older than the country. It was founded in 1769, so it was like way,
Wow.
way, way, way back. But at my college, there was a lot of natives. So, and I lived in the Native American house. It was our own like residential kind of affinity house. I lived there for 3 years, and so I was like constantly surrounded by natives, even though I was at an Ivy League, institution. And so we had these kind of like critical conversations of like staying up till 3, 4 in the morning when we don't want to do homework, like talking
Hmm.
about like the messed up stuff in representation. And like my freshman fall, it was only offered once. It was Native Americans in film and television. And I've never viewed film the same way because I took that just out of like I wished I could have gone. I think if I was more of an advocate for myself and I wasn't like my family's Hail Mary, to like go
Hmm.
back, get educated, and be an engineer, be a doctor. I wish I was more independent and free thinking to be like, oh, I want to be a filmmaker. That's what I wanted to do. Like I
Hmm.
wanted to major in film, but my mom was like, what are you gonna do for a job? And I didn't have a good response, so I ended up being an engineer, or at
Hmm.
least like being an engineer major. But I took Native Americans in television and film, and God, that changed my life. Like it was in the Native American Studies department, and we just talked about like common tropes, the carnivalesque, the gays, the common stereotypes that are perpetuated throughout. And I just never registered that, growing up watching like John Ford westerns and like John Wayne movies. And I mean, just because that's what you grew up on, along with
Yeah.
the '80s movies that you're talking about. Van Damme and Seagal movies. We grew up on all that, and then you go back now and you rewatch it. The native representation of that is it's awful. Like it's
Yep.
never good. But you like accommodated that and that you accepted that. So you see Billy in Predator and you're like, yeah, that's badass. It's even despite all the stereotypes. You see T Wolf in Street Fighter, Night Wolf in I'm sorry, T
Mortal
Hawk in
Kombat.
Street Fighter. Yeah, Night Wolf
Yeah.
in Mortal Kombat. I can't remember. I think it was Thunder and Killer Instinct. You see that and it's
Hmm.
all stereotypical and you're just like, man, this is awesome. And but then taking that class, I'm just like, oh my gosh. Like it was like when I learned about mascots. Like I'm from Tuba City. It was the Tuba City Warriors my entire life. Never saw an issue with it. And then when I finally got the blinders removed, I'm just like, holy crap, And it was that same
Hmm.
realization with film and television. And I never saw it differently. And I never had an opportunity, much like yourself, to like engage in that discourse after Dartmouth, especially after Dartmouth. Like anytime I brought it up to people, it was just like, it's like, why, out of all the things you could be consuming your time with, why that? That was kind of the response I would get. And so when I had the opportunity to start this podcast, I did, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I bet. And some of the guests you've had, I've been impressed by actually. I'm surprised.
Nice.
I'm surprised. I'm like, wow, he got that person on his
Nice.
podcast.
I'm
Yeah.
surprised too. I'm surprised too. Like when I have like Natalie Benali on, that was like one of my first ones. It was helpful. But then like I got Bobby, Bobby Wilson was my latest one.
Hmm.
I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember watching him in 1491s back in high school.
Oh yeah, for sure. I had to like control myself a little bit. I was like fangirling a little bit. I've met him a few times, through like friend of a friend. and we've so it wasn't like the first time ever meeting him, but talking it to him like about work, which we didn't do the times I hung out with him. It
Yeah.
was different. So that was a lot of fun. That was a
You
lot
got
of
to
fun.
get Dallas Go Tooth next.
Bro, I would love that. I have a list that's not on screen right now, but I would love to get like the 1491s, like Brian Redcorn with his like Buffalo Nickel Creative Company. I would love to get him.
Yeah.
Even Sterling's brother, Bronson Harjo, like I'd love to have him on at some point, because I had Riker Six Killer on. He's a native stuntman, native actor, and he was in Reservation Dogs. Like it's so much fun to like almost find your niche in this little community that's big but small at the same time because it has natives in it. And I think that's like the best thing too, is like even connecting like with you on this, like it's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I'm I, for me, I guess like now, like this is a good time. I guess I would argue it's a good time for us, for natives,
Absolutely.
because we're having these conversations, we're having this dialogue that I'm sure like plenty of people have had in the past, but because of the social media age that we're living in, and all, we're able to kind of expand and not only have these conversations within ourselves, but allow others to kind of join in or experience these conversations.
Absolutely.
And like in regards to like Reservation Dogs and like Rutherford Falls, like I don't know, in my perspective, people don't realize, but like it really is a big step in native representation.
I swear you're looking at my show notes, because that's right. And then the next thing I want to talk about is Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs coming out at the same time. Like how we've been treated in representation, there's no way these shows come out in the same year. Like it's amazing that they're coming out. Like you would think they'd be years apart, but they're coming out at the same time. And I think Rutherford Falls is a shame it's on Peacock. Like it's another streaming pay service people have to do. And I feel like Hulu is more accessible because more people have already had Hulu for whatever reason. I mean, not for whatever reason, it's just been around longer. So I feel like more natives have seen it, but I feel like that shows for us. Like Rutherford Falls, I feel like is more of a universal appeal. And can you talk a little bit about that? Like your history of I feel like every native at some point has like compromised in the representation, and seeing Reservation Dogs now, it's like turns everything you've seen on its head.
You mean compromise in the sense that like we kind of just take what we have? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
So sorry.
We're just cutting each other off. Go ahead.
I legit have a video idea I want to do about this. There's actually a media theory thing called like audience reception theory, and there's like 3 different types. There's like oppositional. So any audience member will watch something and they'll oppose it, they'll negate it, they'll be like, I don't like this. You know what I mean? Then you have like, I forgot what it's called, but it's literally like they accept it, they love it. That's the opposite end of the spectrum. Whatever they watch, they love it. Avengers Infinity War, like everyone loved that, right? Then you have negotiated. Negotiated is this middle ground. Negotiated was more like where, the text or the film, whatever you're watching, it is a bit like, not registering to you, right? But you can negotiate to yourself why you like it. You can, let's say like, I, for one, we natives do this, lots of other minorities do this. Like there's some representation from like previous films that maybe we don't like we know we shouldn't like, but we still like it, maybe a bit unironically, if that makes sense. That's kind of a negotiated approach of representation, for us as natives, right? Like me with like Billy and Predator.
Yep.
Although
prime
he's
example.
although he's very stereotypical, right? I personally freaking love his character.
Yeah, I grew up with that. Yeah, and he was actually native. Sonny Landham's actually native too.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of a negotiated thing. And I think as a native people, ever since the beginning, we've negotiated. I remember Russell Means saying in Pocahontas, when he voiced
Chief Powhatan.
And he said in an interview, like, this is the most accurate depiction that we have. And I know what he meant. Like subtextually, but like on the surface, it's like, nah, bro. Like, what are you saying?
Even like you try to think like, let me take myself back to 1998 or 1996, and it's like, no, it wasn't. Like of all things, it's like, ugh. But same thing.
You could
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Let's say with him in that interview in the making of. he was like, when they did the drawings and they showed that opening scene when the camera pans over the land and then you see the people harvesting corn, you see the huts and everything. He was like, they included us, they included our input, because you saw all the huts just kind of like hodgepodge together. He's like, in our cultures, he's all the doors would have been opening toward the east to the rising sun. And so Disney took that and they're like, oh, that sounds good. So they changed all the animations, so all the huts you open up. And that's like something that's a throwaway thing, like nobody really pays attention to that except for him. But for him, he's like, they listen to us, they really want this to be right. And it's just so much in line with what you're saying, with like, we negotiated on our really values of what we wanted to see in terms of representation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you have, and I'm sure you have, elders in your family who like really like the old John Ford movies
Oh,
still.
for sure.
Yeah, like because it's like it's the only native representation they grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also not very, I would argue that most elders, they don't really see, you know, they see what they want to see, if that makes sense. And everybody does that, right? But like, oh yeah, like there's natives in this movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though the protagonist is a white character, even though the native characters are subjugated to being like a throwaway character, right? We were like, that's the best we have.
Wind River,
and we're
perfect
and we're
example.
yeah, exactly, and we're gonna
Yeah.
take it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And we've negotiated for a very long time, and we still do. Like, I mean, it's funny. Like, on TikTok, I see lots of things about Nacho Libre, right? And lots of Mexican people, they love Jack Black's interpretation of
Right.
Nacho Libre, right? Even though he isn't Mexican himself, they love it. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? And I don't know. I don't want to speak for that community and say that they negotiate for that, but you know, we kind of do the same thing.
Right.
People like even in Rutherford Falls, they make fun of it, saying that Lou Diamond Phillips, his character, right? Natives love his character, even though he isn't native himself.
Yep. Yep.
And so I guess I would argue that I don't think we're completely there yet, but we're beginning to get into that era where we don't necessarily have to negotiate much anymore, where
Mm-hmm.
we can take what we see and we can fully embrace it, like in the case of Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs, where we can be fully, this is where we're at right now. We can
Mm-hmm.
appreciate all of it instead of only parts of it.
I think it's evident I mean, just our everyday, where you see so many natives wearing Blackhawks jerseys or Redskins jerseys, like not even the Washington football team, like the actual logo. And it's just like, we're in California. What are you doing? And they'll rock it just because it's like, it's
It
got
has a native
natives on it.
person on it.
Yeah, it's got a native person on it. And you're like, what are you doing wearing that? And it's like, for them, that's cool. And it's evident, even I just did the episode on episode 4 of Reservation Dogs, Punkin Lusty, when he's at the gas station, he's buying his son like a tomahawk toy. He's like buying that for Bear. It's kind of like, unless you're really big attention, you don't see it. But to him, he's like, oh, this is native. It's freaking cool. And like for some people, that compromise is so ingrained, and that's a difficult conversation to have with natives, because you don't want to be coming off as pompous. You don't want to be coming off as like, I have the answers, I have the knowledge, you're beneath me. And it's so hard to really approach that, to get people to understand, like, this frames your mindset of like what's acceptable outside of just this movie. It frames it in how you view like your government, how it treats you. It frames how you like accept how society views us and treats us, and yeah, absolutely.
It's difficult. I mean, you see it in products too. Like, I know plenty of natives who will buy some sort of product, like a purse or a jacket or a shirt, right? It'll have a native design on it.
Yeah,
but it won't be by a native company. They're like, oh yeah, because it's cool. It has this design on it, right?
They'll wear the Urban Outfitters like pocket with the Pendleton design, or like the tank top with Pendleton design, and I'm just like, what are you doing?
Or those fleece. I mean, I was gifted to me, but those fleece blankets you see at the fair or at the flea markets, right? It's got all these native themed designs, but they're probably like made in Vietnam or China.
Oh yeah, for sure. I have one, like it's our dog hair cover on top of our ottoman right now. I have that in my living room.
Exactly.
I had that exact thing. And that's not to say like it's not like all of us are hypocrites when it comes to that. But I think that recognizing that compromise of what you're saying, it's like, making compromises with freaking Nightwolf and T-Hawk, all Billy and Predator, all of that needs to be acknowledged, and you can still love those things as long as you
Hmm.
fully understand, maybe not fully understand, but you come to the realization, like after you've unpacked it and evaluated it, like I, even though Billy's problematic, I'm like, man, I was 5 when I first saw Predator. That's a special place in my heart. Terminator 2, Predator, like those just
Hmm.
hold a special place in my heart. Like even though it's problematic, it's a part of my childhood. It's hard for me to not like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with Nightwolf for me.
Mm-hmm.
He's so over the top, like all the stereotypes. And I don't know why. Unironically, I just love it. It's just funny to me. Like, I like it for the goofiness of it, not necessarily
Yeah.
because of the seriousness of it, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. And it's the same for Billy because, it's just, yeah, it's funny to me. I love the
Absolutely.
over the topness of stuff like that.
Right.
But yeah, like, but in regards to Rutherford Falls and the stuff and Reservation Dogs, I think we're reaching the beginnings of an era where we don't necessarily have to compromise all the time.
Right.
We can be comfortable of consuming something that is, uh, I, I guess you could say it depends if it's made specifically for us or it's a piece of mainstream media that is safe for us to consume, if
Well,
that makes sense.
no, regardless though, I think that regardless of who it's made for, the creators themselves are all native, which has never happened
Hmm.
before. And in a major production studio like that, like it's never happened where like Disney is greenlighting this stuff, and it's like
Yeah.
you look at their history, they have, Squanto and Pocahontas, like, and then freaking Peter
Oh,
Pan, and then now you have this, this is all the same company, so it's progress.
yeah.
I want to talk about Reservation Dogs specifically for now. What was your, I know your episode is out there of like what you thought about it, but what is your, do you have a favorite episode, favorite character? Like when you think of Reservation Dogs, like what jumps out at you?
The second to last episode was my favorite. The one with Bill Burr in it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was my favorite one. It was very well directed. Like out of all of them, it was my favorite one. Mostly because that episode we got to see more character than we did before. And so
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is me. I'm gonna talk about this in my next video.
No,
But
it's okay.
I have my native hat, right? And
Yeah.
then I have my filmmaker hat. And it's really hard for me sometimes to separate them. But I guess like overall as a show, and this is me taking my native hat off. This is my filmmaker hat. There were lots of things that could have just been tighter and better. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like some things were drawn out, right? Especially when it comes to characters. Um, but my native hat, like I loved it. I can I'll take all of it.
Mm-hmm.
But my favorite episode was the second to last one in particular, mainly because it was the most real, particularly the ending. Um, I don't know. It was the strongest one out of all of them. It didn't feel like a filler episode. There were a few episodes that felt kind of like a filler episode. I know they kind of were striving towards some sort of insight in character, but I just didn't feel it strong enough. It's
Mm-hmm.
not an acting issue. I think it was purely a writing issue. But the second to last one was probably my favorite. The last episode I didn't hit me as strong,
Okay.
but the second to last one really did, and I
Which one
enjoyed
felt like a
that one.
filler episode to you?
Uh, the hunting one.
Episode
That one,
6. Yeah. Willie
yeah,
Jacks.
I loved it, like the fact that we got to see more of her and
Mm-hmm.
more about her and stuff. But it just felt slow. It really did kind of feel like an anime filler episode. Like,
It felt
uh,
yeah, I did. Well, that's one of my favorite episodes. I hunt, I fish, and so that's like it hit a little different for me simply because of that.
oh
Um,
yeah.
but
But like I said in
I
my
agree.
video,
Go ahead.
I appreciate how we got to see more of Willie Jack,
Mm-hmm.
most specifically in how like that her cousin's suicide like really affected her and her dad. I like the flashbacks we got.
There's
Um, but yeah,
yeah,
that's just me
there's
though.
what felt like a filler episode, even though I loved it, was episode 3 with Uncle Brownie. Like that
Yeah.
that kind of just
Hmm.
was like what, like you remove that episode, it's the same show,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Exactly.
episode 4, like the 4, 5, 6, and 7 were to me substantive because they deep dived into each of the 4 main characters, even though they might have been drawn out. Like episode 3, even episode 2, like while I loved Bobby Lee's IHS character, that really didn't
Hmm.
advance the plot forward. Like you could have cut out 2 and 3, it could have went right from 1 to 4, and we would have had the same show, in my opinion. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that episode 7, that was, I mean, I was looking forward to that. I'm a massive Bill Burr fan, so I couldn't wait to have his episode come on. And it's interesting that you say that that was your favorite directed episode, because it was directed by Tazba Chavez,
Yeah.
and that's her first time directing. So what did you think
Yeah.
of that?
Yeah, that's yeah, she did a really good job with it.
Nice.
Just, from me coming from that, you know, having directed things and being educated in that, like, it was just strong.
Mhm.
Obviously, you know, I you could take Bill Burr out of it and put someone else in it, and it would still be a well directed episode.
Right.
I just felt it. I felt that was the strongest emotional episode for me, and I really did feel for Alora and her
Mhm.
character very strongly because of that.
I've
The last one, it was, I don't want to say it was disappointing, but it was just kind of like,
same.
it was they could have done something a little stronger in my opinion. Um, the bunker stuff was a little awkward.
Yeah. Yeah, that
um,
was, I'm sure for people from Oklahoma or from that area, like that was like, oh my gosh, finally. And for me, I'm just like, I'm from Arizona. I've never seen a
Ye-
tornado in my life. Like, I
yeah,
don't understand this.
my favorite part of that whole episode was the uncle, like his strong medicine stuff.
Mm.
Like that was my favorite part of that whole episode. I wish that conversation between Alora and
And
Bear,
Bear. Hmm.
it could have been somewhere else on a different context. Or it could have. It just can't. It kind of came out of nowhere. I felt like there
Hmm.
was not too much build up to that explosive interaction between those two. Um, but that's just me. Like, I'm very nitpicky because I come from that writing background. I'm
Yeah.
I'm really I'm really about setup and payoff. You know what I mean? And the fact that Alora feels a little bit gypped. Like, we only saw that maybe twice. I wish that
That's,
we could see that more and then have that blowout between those two characters. Then I would have bought it a little bit more, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
There needed to be, yeah, you're right. There needs to be a big of a blow up of like, it felt just like, fine, then I'm gonna go to store without you kind of thing. It's like not leave. It's like I'm not gonna leave to California. Like I'll be right back. That's kind of what it felt like. Like you,
Fine,
I don't,
Dan.
yeah, fine, Dan. Like I didn't get this finality of like, oh God, she's maybe never gonna come back. Like I don't feel that right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That was unfortunate. But I mean, like, again, that's my filmmaker hat,
mhm,
coming off. But my native hat, like, there were lots of things I loved about
loved
it. Of
it, loved
course,
it.
Dallas Goldtooth's spirit
And
was
so I want
definitely.
to talk about that too. So that's once again, man. I'm not screen sharing, but you're right on my right locked in step with my notes. The payoff and setup of William Knifeman. That's something I didn't know. One was possible, and two you could do. Um, it's like you see it and you're like, oh, I've seen this before. Like you kind of have like as soon as in episode 1 when you see William Knifeman, you see Spirit coming on the horse, you're like, oh, here we go again. Like even non-native and native alike, like you kind of have a general idea in your head of like where this is going to go, and that's where like the comedian aspect of like all the writers goes, and it takes you and goes in a completely different direction.
Hmm.
So provide some context around like why that particular character is so impactful.
Well, it's ironic to me because if I remember correctly, I could be completely talking out of my butt here, but Taika Waititi was originally helping out with Moana when it
No
was in
kidding.
pre-production.
Okay.
And one of the main issues, I mean, it isn't the main issue. I think he had other stuff to work on. But I think one of the things that he didn't particularly like was the fact he said something like, I don't like spirit characters helping the protagonist. And that's exactly what we get in Moana, right?
Yeah.
With her grandma. And I think he particularly said something like that, right? But it's ironic that he's an executive producer in this.
That's hilarious.
When it comes to executive producing, executive producers, all they really do is provide the money. And knowing that Taika and Sterling are homies, I think Taika just provided a lot of support financially. I don't know how much creative support. I'm sure he had a lot of some input, but I thought it was
They co-wrote the first episode, so he definitely was involved.
yeah. I think it's funny though, like he like didn't like that trope, but I think a part of me feels that he was on board with this one because it subverted that expectation, the
Hmm.
cliche of having a spirit character helping the protagonist because he's so unconventional and
Yeah,
so goofy.
he's very much like a Mushu, and it's like, why are you here? You know, you're here for like comedy relief, but he's. I think it's interesting that like he like tries to provide sage wisdom and like still drops f-bombs and still just uses like everyday speak. Like he doesn't have the stereotypical cadence, you know, that we've become accustomed to throughout all of the westerns. And I love that it's just like a reprise of like all of his. It's like an amalgam of his roles in like being the 1491. You know, his experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's funny about that is his character. I'm trying to think of. I had it in my head just now. Damn it, I lost it. I was
Okay.
I was gonna say something regarding his character about how. You know what? I lost it.
That's
so
okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. So with his, we'll find it. It always comes back, man. I think what I love too is the story of him being at the battle, and I was expecting this epic payoff, and it was an epic payoff, but in a way I never even thought about. You know, the horse stepping into a gopher hole, rolling over him, and
Rolls
killing
over
him.
and dies.
Yeah,
I was that now. I remember I was going to tell
I
you.
knew it.
He reminds me. You would know this. He reminds me of Coyote
No kidding.
because I mean, if you really look at Coyote's stories,
These are Navajo trickster stories, by the way. But go
yeah,
ahead.
he's always he's really in the way. He's really goofy, right? But for some weird reason, by providence, he always winds up somehow helping pushing the narrative along.
That's really
And
interesting, man.
Spirit reminds me of that. He
What
reminds me of that
a
type of character.
what a mind fuck to have the spirit of the show be the trickster.
Yeah,
Man, that's
he
awesome.
and he's so cryptic, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's not straightforward. I mean, again, this is another critique. I didn't like Bear as a character.
Really?
He's
Yeah.
so dense. I was so mad because, like, even Spirit said it in the last episode. He's like, "When I told you there was unfinished business, maybe that's not what I was talking about." And I'm like, "Yes, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
but like, I don't know. He kind of reminded me of a bit of like of a kind of a trickster-ish like Coyote in the sense that like he's really goofy on the surface, does everything wrong, or is just unconventional, right? But
Mm-hmm.
in the overarching theme of things, kind of helps push things along to help our characters get to where they need to be, if that
I
makes sense.
no, it absolutely does, and that's my favorite character to date. But my favorite thing in this show is Deer Lady,
Yeah.
because I've never. So episode 5 is my favorite simply because of Deer Lady. Like I like the West Studio appearance was kind of cool, like, but I wasn't like, oh my god, you know. I like that he was reading about string theory, and that kind of like running joke paid off.
Yeah.
And then of course the freaking Kirk Fox's character telling him to walk in beauty, like that had me and my wife like rolling. But
what does he say? He's like, "Yata hey,
yeah,
it is Dene for all is well."
Yeah.
We all know a guy like that.
We all know a guy like that. You know, when they drop the Hokahe in the beginning, like Kirk Fox's character is great.
Yeah.
And he always wears that freaking choker. Yeah, he's just know so many people like that, unfortunately. So many Santa Fe Indians. But
meet him at powwows.
No, yeah,
like
for sure.
Or
for sure
at the fairs.
Absolutely. I was gonna talk about Deer Lady because I've never seen like horror portrayed that way. Like where it's the setup would, if it's a non-native room, a non-native writer's room, like a grandma would have been looking off in the distance. I remember when I was a little girl and they told me stories. Like they didn't have any of that. It just was like this ominous thing that people referred to casually, and it just like boom, you get hooves and there's no explanation. I learned what Deer Lady was talking to my Oklahoma friends who are podcasters, and they explained to me what Deer Lady was. So I knew to look for the hooves because they were like, Deer Lady, just a regular looking woman who's supposed to be like one of the most beautiful women you've ever seen. And she lures you into the woods and kills you. That was like what they told me. And so they're like, but the telltale is that they have deer feet. And so you're supposed to like look at their feet. And so once I saw her hitchhiking, I was like, oh my gosh, here's Deer Lady. And I saw Kiowa Gordon, and the payoff like terrified me and my wife. And it's just like, because to me, it's like the Yana stories, the Skinwalker stories we heard, it's like always at night. It's never during the day. So like to have all this stuff happening during the day, I'm just like, oh my God. And it was that was a great payoff for me.
Yeah, I mentioned in my video that it's an interesting way of introducing how mysticism is pretty much an everyday thing for Native people.
Mm-hmm.
Not, well, I would
That's
say
a great way
every
to say it.
day,
No,
but
no, no. You
it's
hit it. You hit
common.
it. You hit it right.
Yeah, mysticism is very, uh, it's just there. The fact that even the kids look away from the owl eyes,
Yeah,
even though they're probably not super traditional in their beliefs, that's still something that's ingrained in them. And
absolutely.
I thought it was interesting to portray that in the Deer Woman as well. It just for me, because I also liked how it it showed how it impacted Big in his life and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. I personally didn't think it was scary. I just thought it was eerie, but that's
Yeah.
just me.
Yeah, I think
But
Erie was the best way. I think Erie, where the scary part was when she walked up and gave cheese. I'm sorry, Big the toilet paper underneath. Like I was just like, oh god. But everything,
yeah,
yeah, eerie is the right word, and I think it was scary to me too because at the very end when they're at the funeral, sitting there and she's talking to him and kind of giving him that like life lesson of like
hmm,
basically explaining his whole like motive in life of like be good, and
yeah,
that like terrified me because I'm just like because in Indian country, they're not like these spirits that come and go. They're regular people. And I think that's
hmm,
what always like as kids, you're scared. You're like, oh, that person, what if they're a shapeshifter? What if they're a skinwalker? Like anybody
hmm,
could be a skin. That's why you don't talk about people. That's why you don't carry grudges. That's why you don't, there's like so many things of like how we live our life. And you're absolutely right in that it's not separate. Whereas I feel like even in other indigenous communities that are in the United States, like it's still this like otherness. Whereas like we're on our homeland, so like we're still connected to that power and those roots and that
hmm.
culture, and it's terrifying because at any given time, that could happen, and that's real.
Yep, yeah, and that's the same thing. Like I think about the owl thing,
Mm-hmm.
um, because like I just remember I was how old was I? I was like 9 or 10, and my mom she's like, "Hey, be careful today." I'm like, "Why?" She's like, "I heard an owl this morning." And the thing is, like, my mom is like not super traditional, and she's Christian, but
Yep.
she
Yep.
still has that. And it's just she's like, "Look out today, be careful. I heard an owl this morning," and I'm like, "Okay." you know, yeah,
We had that. My dad is he's I don't know what do we call him. I'll say agnostic. He's not he grew up Catholic, but that's not his thing anymore. But and we always had these like philosophical debates, like driving, going on road trips and stuff, just me and him. And so I was like, this guy kind of doesn't believe in anything. He believes in energy. He believes in like the tenets of like physics and like science, but he's not really like spiritual kind of person. But every time a coyote would cross our path, man, homie would pull over and we'd have to wait
yep.
for another vehicle to break the path. Like it made no sense to me because I like as an adult, I'm like, Dad, how do you have? But he says that's just him reconciling his culture. Like that's just who he is. Same
Hmm.
thing with an owl. We saw an owl once like fly right in front of us. It was like the wingspan was the same as the truck. We went immediately home and told my grandpa we had a ceremony. Like just
Hmm.
because that's what we saw. Because it's like
Yep.
you don't play with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really I think to me that's what spoke to me the most with the Dear Lady thing. I will say one thing is very interesting with the Dear Lady thing. The flashback episode has way more cinematic filmmaking techniques than the rest of the show, if you notice.
Mm.
If you go back, the show is in a full frame,
Mm-hmm.
but the flashback, we have the black bars on top. The aspect ratio is widened. And
Oh,
then the camera movements are a lot more deliberate. It's a lot more. The cuts are a lot more deliberate. And I thought
interesting.
that was a very interesting thing. How his flashbacks and the storytelling behind a Deer Lady was way more, I guess you could quote unquote, cinematic than the rest of the show. I thought that was very interesting too. It's like
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it denoted kind of the seriousness of her presence to the character, which I
That's
thought was
why
really
I
cool.
love, I love, I love that you're on this show. I wouldn't have come across that. Maybe like when I'm
Yeah,
in my 40s or 50s, I would have been like, "Hey, I never noticed that before. The aspect ratio is different." So that's awesome. Black
yeah.
Horse Low directed that episode. I'm not familiar with a lot of his work, so maybe that
Is he
had.
Navajo? I don't know.
I think
That
so.
sounds like a Navajo name.
Black Horse Low. I think
Yeah,
I
sounds like a
believe
Navajo
I
name.
believe he's Navajo.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah,
yeah,
I don't know too
it's
much about him. I feel bad. Like some of these people I don't know, and I'm like, okay, now I gotta research who they are. I
Yeah,
feel bad
Sydney
I don't know them.
Freeland. I know she was involved with Junktown's Finest. I think she
Mhm.
directed that, but yeah,
She
like
directed a an episode of Rutherford Falls as well.
also, yeah, yep, you're right, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, she also directed like a few Walking Dead episodes
Mm-hmm.
and a Grey's Anatomy episode. She's just kind of been all over directing stuff, which is really cool.
Is that what you're
But yeah,
trying to get into, doing that kind of same path, or are you like more
yeah. I
civil?
mean, I guess my ambition in the next year or so is to try to get into the Sundance Indigenous Lab. That's
Okay.
my goal. That's my goal.
Where
Uh,
Bird Running Water just left, right?
yeah.
Because he was the head of that program.
Yep. Yep.
So
And
have they announced the replacement for that position, or do you know that person at
I
all?
I have no clue. I've been
Okay.
following it. They canceled it this year, which was sad.
Hmm.
So I'm like constantly on the website looking at their application. I'm like, okay, okay.
So what is that? So
Because
let's talk about that. I've never had somebody who's like aspiring to go to the labs, because like there's a lot of prominent native directors that went through there. Most notably Sterling, he went through that, and like through
yeah,
his
that's
relationship.
where that's actually where Sterling and Taika became homies,
Yep,
is
I
through
was just
that
gonna say
program.
that. I've heard so many
Yeah,
podcasts that he's been on, and that's like his relationship. That's how him and Black Horse. I'm sorry, him and Bird connected, and how they got ended up meeting Taika. And so,
yeah, and then Sydney was in it as well.
yep, yep.
It's so I actually work with people who helped out there because it's here in Utah.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's either just up the road from where I'm at in the Provo Canyon
Wow.
Sundance Resort, or they do it in Park City. Either one of those two. And what it because they also have different labs. They have like a screenwriter's lab and a director's lab. I think they have like a cinematography lab. And I actually some of the cinematographers I work with actually helped out on those before, so they could
Wow.
tell. They told me firsthand like what it's like. The only difference is the indigenous one is specifically just for indigenous people, like,
Hmm.
and that's actually kind of the main thing that Robert Redford wanted to get out of the institute, as far as I understand. So for me, I guess, part of it is a motivation to actually try to have some pretty intense training. In school I had it, right? But because of the logistics of my program, I got in like super late. I didn't get a chance to make a capstone film. And that's like honestly one of my biggest regrets, because I just didn't have the time to do it.
Now
Like,
that sucks, because that's your interview. Like that's what you'll
yeah,
show to people.
exactly. Yeah, and so I regret that I didn't get a chance to do that. Like, my goal was to try to make a comedy, but like all in Navajo, which is
Mm.
really ambitious. I still think it could be done, but for the Sundance one that I want to try to do, it would completely different story. But I guess my goal is to try to just get that training, get that one-on-one with people. Because as far as I understand it, like, you write a short film, probably like 20 pages long,
Okay.
and then they help you film like two scenes from it or something like that.
Okay.
So they put you through the whole pre-production process, production process, and post-production process. As far as I understand it, that's how it goes.
Okay.
Um, I've been tempted to reach out to people who have done it already and ask them about it.
You should.
Um,
You should. I
yeah,
think that's my favorite thing about Indian country, is we're so helpful. Like when somebody's looking for help and they're genuinely looking for it, like we'll support. Man, I hope that works out for you. That'd be exciting. I hope
yeah,
that.
yeah. Like I said, like, that's my ambitions. I kind of want to get into that space, and I guess this is me personally. I guess I when it comes to natives making native content, this is a whole nother thing than non-natives making content. The reason I really liked Rutherford Falls, mostly in particular, and obviously Reservation Dogs, is like it's laced with the humor.
Hmm.
And most I don't want to be too critical, but it's just one thing that I
Nope.
see the most
Go
is
for it.
like
Go for it.
most native filmmakers, unfortunately, a lot of the stuff they drive towards making are stuff that's just ridiculously serious all the time. Documentary, even abstract films, they're layered with a lot of I would say social political subtext or religious subtext, and I love it, and that is definitely a space for it. But I just there's not a lot of genre films made by native. Like, Blood Quantum is one of the few ones that I can think of
Yep.
where,
Love that one. Yep.
and it's a zombie horror slash slasher flick, right? And obviously it has these undertones, right? But like, it has fun in the process,
To me,
like,
to me, that's like one that I wish was a TV show, because there would be so much comedy in it. In that like
yes.
post-apocalyptic world, there would be so much comedy. But you're right. There isn't, like, outside of Smoke Signals, which now is like I don't know. It's just kind of whack. It's like it doesn't. It's almost there on so many levels. I'm like, man, it's like almost awesome so many times, but it's still like a maturation point. It's still like a foundation that we have like laid on for now to like build up. But like you're right, there's not very many comedies out there, and it's
It's not
interesting. We have
well, not just comedies. I would argue sci-fi, um, sci- even fantasy,
yeah,
um, crime drama. I mean, like I know that they're gonna try making a series based
Dark
off
Wind.
of, yeah, and because I always thought like, or even like Tony Hillerman's work would work fascinatingly work well as like each book could be a season.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's laced with so much cool stuff. And I guess for me, it's like in the native space where I feel like where native creators are a little too afraid to branch out into those things. Maybe
Do you,
because they think that maybe non-native audiences wouldn't like it, if that makes sense. Where I see a lot of native filmmakers doing lots of domestic narratives, meaning it's just like it's a drama surrounded like, reservation life, and how, for some people it's really bad, or like making some sort of social commentary. And like while we do need those and we have a place for it, I feel like native content is just so laced and layered with that type of stuff.
that's
And it's,
yeah.
it's literally just me frustrated. It's just my own personal opinion. I'm like, why can't we have freaking, a native Conan the Barbarian type story?
That's why I wish
It's
we had APTN, the Aboriginal People's Television Network in the States. That's where I'm like jealous
yes.
because Canadians get that, First
Yep.
Nations people, they have that. All the things we're griping about, they've seen in some
Mm-hmm.
form. And,
Yep.
there's varying degrees of quality, but like it's like they get that. They
Yeah.
have like Mohawk girls and like the list goes on. It's just like, gosh, north of 60, so many shows, like they're ahead of the game. Like the States were so far behind and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Yep.
How much of that do you think is like appetite for those? I guess like how much of it is apprehension by the native filmmakers, do you think? And how much of it is just being told like there's no market for that?
I think it's both, unfortunately. But this is where I think, we as native filmmakers need to be clever. Um, it goes in line with like having native themes or native characters not so overt. That's my thing. I don't want to get too political, but I just sometimes
No,
it's
get
just
into
with
it.
any this is my gripe with, I would say, I, I don't know if I'm shooting myself in the foot here with this, but
You're
like
good.
um I would argue like anything that is like ridiculously woke.
Mm-hmm.
Um a certain character, I feel like the only thing that is unique about their character is the fact that they're a woke character and nothing else really, if that makes sense. And it's unfortunate, like not just with sexual orientation, but with race or with religion or something. Like for some odd reason the writers will make it like that's the only unique thing about their character and nothing really else. um and I feel like if when it comes to native representation, there's a smart way of making it so that, like, let's say you put a native character in a mainstream setting. I'm also thinking of Resident Alien too, right?
Right.
Where her ethnicity and her culture, it doesn't bash you over the head constantly and saying that like, look she's native and stuff like that. It's just subtly in there. Like it's part of the world there and it flows organically, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
And I personally feel like that's the future of kind of embedding accurate native representation into a more mainstream space. And the apprehension I feel from most filmmakers is that, and also like, oh, there isn't a market. You have to be careful. You have to be clever enough to be able to inject indigeneity in some sort of mainstream format so that everybody could appreciate it. And
Resident
I'll tell you,
Alien. Yeah, Resident
go
Alien is a
ahead.
perfect example of that. But go ahead.
Mhm.
Keep going. Keep going.
Well, I was gonna say this is another thing too. What's on for natives to be appreciative of this? Have you heard of queer coding at all?
Mm-mm.
So queer coding is this phenomenon in the LGBTQ plus community. They do this. They've been doing this for a little years. They take a character from any fictional text, film, television, literature, who may have like, I guess you could say queer tendencies or or something like that. Like they're not overtly queer, and the fan base will kind of, I would say, kind of push that on them that they are queer, if that makes
Mm.
sense. And that's not a bad thing. It's a phenomenon that happens. And I think we as natives, we do that sometimes. We native code things like freaking Baby Yoda. I have no idea what happened, but people are like, Baby Yoda's indigenous. And I'm like, how?
Hmm.
But like, he just somehow appealed, and we kind of pushed that onto little baby Grogu
Yep.
that he's somehow indigenous. There's a native artist. I don't know if you know Ryan Singer.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
he does that. He native codes things. He like indigenizes Star Wars and other random things. You know
Yeah.
what I
Things in
mean?
anime and yep. Yep.
Yeah, and I feel like natives, we do that. We native code things because again, that's all we have. And I think that native coding thing would be on our side as native filmmakers if we slowly inject native things into mainstream media, if that makes
No,
sense.
it makes sense. I think what's really difficult about that is it's almost like trying to like, I don't know, you're trying to catch the right wave. It's like you don't really know what's going to hit, what necessarily isn't. Like it
Yeah.
makes to me, it makes zero. I think you need somebody who is a almost like social scientist to understand like the nuances of like one social science and like what will appeal to people and like do the right PR and like write surveys of your fan base, but also or viewership rather, but also like understand the nuances of our community because the Baby Yoda thing, like I get it now, but there's no way I saw that the first time through. Um, and even like with Stephen Paul Judd's artwork, where he has kind of like that the person with the Hopi buns, and he has like Princess Leia like right behind her,
Mm-hmm.
like that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. Like I never would have seen, but we glom onto that. And what you said is like, oh yeah, that's awesome. That's representation right there. Putting a TIE
Mm-hmm.
fighter over a black and white still of like TPs. I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, like I do that with my own art. I did an art of just like a Navajo warrior looking at shiprock in the sunset, but it's the binary sunset.
Nice,
I do that in my
nice,
own art. Like I did a piece of the hero twins, but it looks kind of like Thor Ragnarok. You
awesome.
know what I mean?
That's
And so
awesome.
like I do that in my own art. I combine the kind of like I native code things, or I combine pop art with native things.
Mhm.
Like I did an art piece of Coyote with Baby Yoda looking at the stars. It's
That's
a
awesome.
layered piece. I can send it to you, but there's a
Yeah,
thought.
hell yeah, that would be amazing.
My whole process behind that piece is indicative of what we do as native people. But going back to like having pushing forward indigenous representation, that might be on our side as natives. But when it comes to a broader audience, that's what I'm saying. We'd have to be smart with it. And like I look at Black Panther. Black Panther was very, if you look at it, it's a it is a piece, a very important piece in my opinion of Black American representation,
Hmm.
because it is on the scale of an international audience, but it gave Black Americans and even Africans to have their own say in that representation, right? But it was because it was Marvel. Like we as natives need something like that. And that's why I'm saying that Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs are kind of on
You you know
that
you know
same
you know
realm.
what hit like that for me was where it's like I didn't necessarily native codify or native code this movie, but it just made me think like we could do this. I know when I saw Shang-Chi. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it yet. No.
Oh, I highly recommend anybody watching this, anybody that's native specifically, go watch Shang-Chi. Like I watched that and I'm just like, we could do this. Like it is because it's like so much of it makes me jealous that like, like ancient China, like they wrote stuff down and they created monuments. Like natives didn't do that. So much of our culture isn't necessarily as ingrained and written down in the same manner that theirs was, but there's so many cultural connections and so many parallels to like native culture and like spiritualism, and it's just like gosh, we could totally have this. And like I love that movie. I can't wait to go. I'm gonna probably go see it again tonight actually. It's just it just got my like brain like just so thinking about possibilities of like it's possible. Like where before when I saw Black Panther, I'm like, man, this is amazing, but natives will never get this. But I saw Shang-Chi and I'm like, oh, we could do something like this for sure.
Exactly. And so that's why that's kind of me where I'm pushing towards. That's my direction. Like of course I would love to do like one of my dreams is to do a some sort of dramatic adaptation of the Navajo Long Walk.
Mm. Oh my
That
gosh.
that is there's so many stories behind it. There's so many things, like and I don't want to make it like this sad dramatic thing. I want to make it something that is of course historical and dramatic, but like I don't know. I guess I'm just tired of the sadness,
Yeah.
right? There's sadness in the story of the Long Walk, but there's also lots of hope. And I feel like
Hmm.
we as the films surrounding that aren't hopeful enough. I look at Wind River, right? Like Wind River is just so maddeningly depressing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And like, yeah,
You
okay, we
just have
get
this
it.
like, oh my gosh, these poor people that you have that perception, after that movie.
Yeah,
And it's real
yeah.
crappy.
I do appreciate the attempt to try to bring awareness to the
Absolutely.
NMIW, you know. Um, but it was unfortunate that like the dad, his character was just kind of pushed to the side, and like it really did on a lots of levels. As much as it is well written, it kind of felt like a white savior narrative, in my opinion. It was
Absolutely.
very,
It was.
Jeremy Renner's character saves the day in the end. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's just it.
I've
Yeah.
known I've known Billigana game and fish people that have been near the res. There's no way they would be that awesome. Like I've never met one anywhere near that close. They're the ones that are super lost and we have to tell them like where's where,
Where to go?
where the road forks, where it goes.
Yeah, yeah.
I just refuse to believe that narrative. But you're absolutely right. I think that the Navajo Long Walk, man, even just like thinking in my head, I'm like, that could be an amazing, Band of Brothers style limited series where it's like you're telling a tragic story, but you're going to give it so much depth and show the resilience of the people. Like ultimately, that's what it is. Like that's when we
Mm-hmm.
think about that, it's resilience. And like
Yep.
even so, I went to Bosque Redondo. Me and my wife, when I lived in Albuquerque for a couple of years while she was in grad school, and we were like, we've always heard about it. And we've read about it countless times. We've heard stories, but we'd never been there. And so we left like after work. And by the time we got there, it was closed. Like, thank God it was closed. But it took us forever to get there. Even just
Yeah.
make that drive. It's on the eastern end of New Mexico. And we
Yeah.
made that
It's way out
drive.
there.
And thankfully it was closed. I don't know what would happen had I been able to go in. I don't know if we would have, but we parked on the outside and we just saw the fort. And like it's like you have like memorable cries in your life that just like stick out. Like that's the hardest I've cried. Like that was even just being there. I remember like it was so the gravity of it was so heavy that like I literally like couldn't stand up. I was like on all fours just like bawling, and like me and my wife just like embrace each other, just like fuck. Like how terrible is that? Like just all the weight of it coming. But it was also like cathartic in a way of just like our and we driving back, we're like, how far is this? Like we walked all the way there and back. And we're survivors, we're resilient. And that like pain from that experience like bred like bore out a conversation of us talking about how resilient our people are, how important it is to learn our language, like how amazing is it that we're still here, and like got us talking about like residential schools. And like it was such a great conversation afterwards. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I married my wife. She's my best friend. I can have those conversations with her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like one of the most powerful moments of my life. And we thought that exact same thing that day of like, why don't more people know about this story? Because that's a powerful story to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, like, yeah, there's just lots that people just don't know about. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of like one of my ambitions to
Outside of a
do.
documentary, there you don't hear
Yes.
about it. Yeah.
Yes. There's no, I mean, Orson Scott Card actually did a dramatization of it in one of his books. It's called Sing Down the Moon.
Hmm.
And he attempts to dramatize and characterize certain Navajo characters in that story.
Interesting.
And I think that's something we need, like again, natives were subjected to history, but in history context, it's we were people. We
Mm-hmm.
had feelings, and experiences. And so yeah, like I just already in my mind, I have specific scenes that I want to project onto the screen
God, I hope they do
that
it.
that will not only speak to non-natives but Navajos alike will be able to. I mean, you're right, cathartic in a way. I mean, traditionally, I've always heard that we were told that we're never going to go back there. And that would be a way for Navajo people in particular to have that catharsis. Like that for me, that would be a film where I'm like, this is the film for my people, overtly. Like this is for my
Hmm.
people, right? And yeah, it just that's just something in particular. I've had images of that in my head ever since I was a teenager of exactly specific scenes I want to do
Which
and
is
how I want to tell it.
which is exactly why we knew we weren't going to go in, but just getting there, my God, like, yeah, there's so many things that run through your head, images of, like, bodies in the snow, and just like the worst, but also best things of, like, survival and bonding and, like, resilience and strength. And that's a TV show to me, man, like a limited series or even a long movie. I hope you do it. I hope you get a chance to do it. If not you, in partnership with somebody, because that is an that's
Yeah,
an important story to tell.
yeah,
Um, and not just Navajos. Like, Navajos, we're real good at Navajo, making everything about Navajos, but there's so many other native tales that need to be told. So that's why, like, the upcoming Scorsese film, Killers of
mm-hmm,
the Flower Moon, like, that's
yep,
awesome. Even though
yeah,
it's a white writer's retelling, it's still based on real events, stuff that actually happened, to oil barons, taking out Osage people to, basically
mm-hmm,
take their oil rights. Like, those are real stories, and I'm happy that that is being told, because that leads to someday a Long Walk story being told. Um,
yeah.
and I think
I
you're.
have.
Go
Oh,
ahead. Go ahead.
sorry.
No, no,
I was gonna
you're
say
good.
I have faith that Scorsese is gonna attempt to try to, uh, I would say, do some justice
Okay.
to that story. I This is the thing. I really like Scorsese as a filmmaker
I was just gonna
because,
ask, like, where's that
um,
belief founded in?
and his obviously his faith. That's ironically, he's a very Catholic man. Even if you look at his work that isn't so Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
but the thing is that he's Italian. This is I look at him as like a case study. He's Italian. He's Italian. He's very Italian, right? All of his work, most of it, he's able to tell Italian American stories so well because he is Italian American. And I look at Spielberg with Schindler's List. There's a reason Schindler's List was so powerful because it came from Spielberg, who is a descendant of people who lived that experience. There's so much passion behind their work because they come from those backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something to be said with native filmmakers. I feel the passion from native filmmakers like Smoke Signals. You know, Chris Iyer, he really tried to portray as much of his heart I can tell into that film. At the end of that film, mostly because of my personal circumstance growing up, the ending in that film just gets me every time.
Same. Same.
But it's because I can tell that Chris Iyer really he knows that feeling, and he knows exactly how that feeling is in the realm of an indigenous reality. And so that's why I'm saying, like, with Scorsese, I of course, with the Killers of the Flower Moon, I think he's gonna be, um I hope, I know the protagonists, or most of them, are gonna be white. It's definitely gonna be a standoff between De Niro and DiCaprio's
Mm-hmm.
characters, right? If you know anything about the story, it kind of really was a standoff. But the indigenous characters, like, I follow the Osage tribe, their Instagram page,
Okay.
and the amount of effort that is going into portraying indigenous characters is astounding. It's
That's awesome.
the costume designs. Uh, y- I I'll send it to you. But
For
on their
sure.
old posts, they'd have, the Osage people, like how they dressed back in that era. It's like this transition between traditional things, traditional uh regalia, and everyday 20th
Hmm.
century life. And so I can tell that they're trying really hard to craft this story well. Obviously, I don't expect it to have a strong protagonist, an indigenous protagonist. The only one I can think of is one of the wives of the characters in the book. The woman kind of, I forgot her name. She is kind of the more central figure. Things around her happen a lot, and I'm curious to see what Scorsese does with it. But I don't know. Again, I'm expecting much out of Scorsese as I can of him being an Italian American. When it comes to indigenous representation, I'm curious because he, in my opinion, he did a really good job with silence in representing Japanese culture. For as far as I can tell,
Mhm.
I'm not Japanese, but like it was a very interesting dynamic story, and I'm curious to see what he does with Killers of the Flower Moon. So that's me
That's
with that.
I'm excited for that. I'm excited for really everything else that's coming with like indigenous led content. I don't know. I'm excited for it, but I should say I'm more curious because it is still, it's not like native showrunners. So I'm curious to see where the show goes. I need to read the book before the movie comes out, but I mean, it's Scorsese and Leo. I'm gonna show up for it, and De Niro. Like I'm gonna show up for it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna show up. Yeah,
I'm curious to see how that turns out. Their dynamic and everything. Freaking Brendan Fraser is going to
Yeah, I
be
was
in it
just gonna
too.
say I'll show up for Brendan Fraser. I love him.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious to see what I wonder if he's going to be a villain or not because there's lots of villains in this story.
Yeah, there's tons of villains. He'll probably be a good guy. And with what the industry's done to him, I'm sure they'll be ready to turn him into a good guy. I sure hope
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Yeah, and I guess for me too, like another thing that I thought of doing was like a ridiculously fun fantasy telling of the hero twins. That's something I've always wanted to see on screen. Um, but that's just me. I think every Navajo wants to see something like that.
Oh, for sure. The hero twins. Well, I mean, there's so many. You could make an ambiguous native hero story like that because there's some kind of hero story like that in a lot of native communities. Like you could do that.
Oh
Maybe
yeah,
not
for
make
sure.
it specific. Like, and I think that would be awesome to see anything like that. Just like something fantasy. I mean, that's run
Hmm.
by natives because it's like up until now, you're absolutely right. It's been all compromised. I
Hmm.
like Legolas. Why? He shoots a bow and arrow, man. He's awesome. That's the
Yep.
closest we got. We like
Yep.
glom on to stuff like that because it's like, man, that's the closest thing we have. Katara in Avatar, we're like,
Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah, that's native right there. We glom on to all of that. And
I have a feeling that one of the showrunners is married to an indigenous person or has family members
from
or
up
best
north.
friends. Yeah, because I follow one of the showrunners who started the show in the first place, and I remember a while back, like last year, he would sell his prints of original artwork,
Hmm.
and he said that all the proceeds will go towards the Navajo Nation during COVID,
Wow.
which was fascinating to me. So I was like, like, and the fact that like the characters, the water tribes are native
Hmm.
is interesting to me. I'm like, maybe they have like a somehow this character is somehow has some sort of indigenous connection, which I thought was curious to me.
They're definitely indigenous from up north for sure.
Yeah.
One one last thing I want to talk about before we get going, of just like you talking about the compromise. I show up for the longest time. I showed up for, and I got excited for anytime I saw a native actor doing something where they weren't overtly native.
Yes.
And so, like Wes Studi when he was Sphinx in Mystery Men, like loved it, loved it.
In Heat too. He's in Heat.
Yep, he's in Heat. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's just a detective. Like he's not like they
He's
don't
he's
overplay
ethnically
it.
ambiguous. They don't even say he's
Yeah.
native.
Yeah. And I like that sometimes, I like it when it's like I'd rather the story not tell us at all
Hmm.
than like we know that they're native, but then the story will tell us they're like of a different ethnicity. I'd rather us just not know at all. Like in the case of Sphinx in Mystery Men, we literally have no clue. We don't, and the
Hmm.
thing is like you don't care. Like it's central to his character that he's this ambiguous superhero mentor. You
Yeah.
know, but yeah, I love him in that movie. It's
Yeah,
so funny.
he
It's so
was
random.
yeah, it was so random. That's number two, Magua and then him, and then
Yeah.
Sphinx.
Yep.
Freaking amazing. So All right, man. Well, I don't have a whole lot more to talk about or to ask you, but I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really excited for your channel. Once again, like go check out Kino Native, or actually it's not Kino Native anymore, Native Media Theory.
Yeah, I had to change it because like everyone was like, "What the hell does Kino mean?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, you're right." Because it's like it's so layered with all this film history,
No, I was thinking Kino
and
from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, and I'm like, oh, that's
exactly,
awesome.
yeah, no, it's layered with a lot of German and Soviet film history.
Okay.
And I was like, you know what? It's too obscure. So I just native media theory is literally straight to the point.
It's really good. It's really good. You have a sick intro. Love your logo.
Yeah, I used a native artist for my I asked him permission for my intro.
Nice.
It's the Burn Your Village to the Ground remix by Neon
Oh,
Natives.
I love
So
it.
check him out.
It's
Neon
a
Natives, he's Navajo.
it's a great intro. I want to I would love so I look at you and I'm like that's goals. Like I would love to do YouTube in the same way that you do, but it's like the labor, the learning. It's like so I just like watch you from afar and I just like envy what you do. So I'm a
I want to do skits down the road. I want to do stuff like that. I want to be like there's lots of
like Bony
boring
War Pony.
but I love those guys. Those guys
Yep,
are
yep.
funny.
Yep. I at one time was gonna have Cody Artis, the main guy, to be on the show. We just, he started his podcast with Marley
He was
Lister.
on the History Channel.
He was on Forged in Fire. Yeah, he was on an
Yeah,
episode of Forged in
that was
Fire.
so random. I was like, wait, it's the fucking sick guy I got
Yeah.
on.
And he's got like the grandma scarf on, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
freaking amazing. Yeah, the floral
Yeah.
scarf. Oh,
Oh, Bony War Pony, man. It's just that specific Navajo humor. Like only Navajos will get it.
mm-hmm.
And I love it. It's so funny.
It's more yeah, it's like James and Ernie kind of comedy where it's just like you either get it or you don't. Like
Yep.
some of it is universal, like Res Universal. Some of
Yeah.
it is like we're making this just for like the 10,000 Navajos that are gonna love this. And like, but
Exactly.
man, it's like you rewatch it over and over just because it's like, what the hell? And
Yeah, I was disappointed because I remember like a couple of years ago they were trying to do like a Kickstarter or something for a movie,
I
and like
remember
I
that.
want to know what it's gonna be about. I was like, shoot, I'll help fund it if I can.
And I sure
But
hope
yeah,
so. I think the main guy, Cody Artis, he's in law school right now, so I think a lot of that stuff is on hold. He does a lot of stuff. He's a bladesmith. He's in law school. He does Bony War Pony on the side. He has his podcast, fucking sick with Marley. So I don't know. He's just doing a lot of stuff. So I think it's just maybe a matter of like where he's going to spend his time. But
yeah,
to see him do something like that, like even a short film would be awesome. I mean, he basically
yeah,
does short films anyway, but I would love to see him like get money to do something like that.
yeah, exactly. And in Navajo country too, there's lots of good filmmakers who are coming out,
Hmm.
and I guess for me, it's just like I want to be able to try to help out with that. It's kind of hard layered. There's layers to it, like okay, like I want to do Navajo filmmaking, and then it's like I want to do indigenous filmmaking overall, and then on top of that, it's just like I want to do like there's stories I want to tell that aren't particularly indigenous at all, that are just fascinating to me, and I would love to play around and
Well,
explore those things.
so now I have more questions, but if you have the time,
Yeah, that's
um,
fine.
I think that's something that people, the term monolith is always thrown around now. That's like, oh, we're not a monolith. I feel like that's like the new sovereignty. It's like, do you really know what monolith means? but but really, it's like we're so nuanced. It's like just because we're both Navajo, we're drastically different. You're born in Shiprock. I'm born and raised in Shiprock. I'm in Tuba. Like they're completely different places, separated by like
Hmm.
3 hours of like drive time, 3.5 hours of drive time, and it's like just natives within themselves, like it's so hard. It's to wrestle with that of like, do I want to cater to just my people because I want to make a living? And if I cater to just my people, I don't think I can make a living and do this. It's like, so,
Hmm.
but do I want to tell all like stories for just natives? And it's like, I don't really know if that's my place. Like, can I do that? Like, can I do that respectfully and do it right by the people? And it's like, or do I just go be a filmmaker and tell regular stories? And it's like, but at that point, am I doing a disservice to my people?
Yeah, and I think it's just a personal preference in my opinion. I think of oh, what's his name? James Wan. I
Mm,
think of him. He is a very successful director, right? But when you think of him, you don't think of him as an Asian American director, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
He definitely has contributed greatly to 21st century horror. And then he like randomly did Aquaman and Fast and Furious, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And but he isn't known particularly as like an Asian American filmmaker, unless you like are super PC about it and you're talking about him in like some sort of formal context or something. He isn't known for that, as opposed to somebody like Aquafina,
Hmm.
where she particularly is. She markets herself as kind of like an Asian American actress and comedian. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Or Ali Wong, like they particularly are Asian American, and they don't necessarily always joke about that stuff. But like I feel like when you hear their names, you kind of think about that. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's hard to talk about. So like I think of Sydney Freeland, where she has directed things that have nothing to do with indigenous representation at all. Sterling Harshaw has too, a couple of things. They just jumped in on projects and helped direct or produce something.
But
Taika Waititi with
I'm curious though how much of that is just like staying in the business and how much of that is like personal choice, like I mean we go through it all the time. Like there's some stuff I get sick of me being native of, like ask me to do something that isn't native. Like on this podcast, like I would love to talk about a movie that's like not native,
yeah,
related, because it's
yep,
like you get sick of it, because it's
yep.
not sick of it, but it's just like that's not all I am. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and then I think it might be both for most people. 'Cause the fact that like let's say like Taika Waititi helping out with Reservation Dogs, but then also the fact that like he's done stuff with Star Wars and
Mm-hmm.
Thor, he's involved in all those things. I would argue that he is very lucky, I think, because he has the ability to do that, to be
Right.
able to navigate and be like, hey, I'm gonna help out with this indigenous project, and I'm sure he helps produce stuff. I mean, like I think he's an executive producer for the Wellington investigation show.
Mm.
It's a spin-off of What We Do in the Shadows. It's about the police officers in Wellington,
Wow.
and they encounter a bunch of supernatural events, and it's like
Wow.
that's still part of his growing up. Maybe not necessarily particularly in Maori, but it's like part of his nationality, right? And I think he still gets to be a part of that and stuff like that. He gets to do that, and I think people don't give him enough credit. Like he is technically an indigenous filmmaker. Like his earlier work is just laced with so much indigenous, storytelling and humor and stuff like that. But he's in this space, and I don't know. It's just personal preference, I think, and I think he is one of those filmmakers who is lucky enough to be able to dip wherever he wants. You know what I mean? And I hope other filmmakers are able to get to that point. Like I said, I think Sydney might be pretty lucky too with that. I don't know. It could just, sometimes they might just take a job because they're like, yeah, shoot, I'll do it. I'll get paid for
Just because they
this.
love the work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll argue this, like, my job, I this job, it's literally, doing ads for social media. I have no personal investment in it whatsoever. But my personal investment is in like, being surrounded by other creative folks and stuff like that it helps me stay creative. Um so I don't know. It's a mixture, I think, of I think some native filmmakers or any type of filmmaker, there comes to a point in their career where they're like, am I going to be, a filmmaker, or am I going to be this type of filmmaker? Am I going to be this specific type? I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to figure that out. I'm curious to see where it goes in the future, maybe even for myself or for other filmmakers. Am I just a native filmmaker, or am I a filmmaker that happens to be native?
So I love that distinction you make, because it the production level, or the production budgets you get for both are drastically different, you
Hmm.
know. And like Gabriel Iglesias, he's a stand-up comedian, Fluffy, mostly people know him as. He says that exact same thing. He's like, I wanted to be a comedian who happens to be Mexican, not a Mexican comedian. He was
Yeah,
like
he.
the
I remember in one of his specials, he literally had to go all around the world just to be called American and not just Mexican, which was fascinating to me. I was like, yeah, like I don't know, and it really boils down to how you identify and what your identity is all about. it's nuanced because it's like in some contexts I'm Navajo, in some contexts I'm indigenous, in other contexts I'm American, and it's I don't know. You have to play with it and figure out. I was in Brazil, and so many people down there were fascinated that I even existed
No kidding.
because yeah,
Oh
because
my
a lot of
gosh.
them felt that like we were practically extinct.
Ugh.
Um, and it was an interesting layer of things. They didn't see me as a typical American. They saw me as like this relic or this survivor of the Holocaust.
Wow.
It's fascinating, and I had to constantly tell them like, no, I'm not Bolivian, I'm not Peruvian. Not to say that there's anything wrong with those people, right?
Yeah.
But I had to fight for my identity down there. I'm like, no, I am Native American.
Hmm.
And it was interesting to me. So I think it really boils down to like how you identify. It boils down to what am I,
And and so yeah, what am I is so much framed about your life experience and where you grow up. Um, because on the res, I'm just a Navajo. You don't even introduce yourself by your clans, unless you meet somebody brand new. But you meet a Navajo or another native somewhere else, like you got to identify, like, oh, I'm Navajo. And
Mhm.
then you're absolutely right. That distinction of like most times I just tell people I'm native unless they pry and like, so where are you from? No, I'm Tuba
Where you
City.
really from?
Yeah, it's just like uh Tuba City, Arizona, man. And they're like, oh, that's on the Navajo res, and then they'll ask them questions, whatever.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but going back to your original question about whether or not, if future native filmmakers, I think it all boils down to just personal preference. That's really what it boils down to. So like for me, again, I would, love to do lots of indigenous themed stories or indigenous stories, you know, but I also would want to do something else
So
too,
I think I think that scares me to a degree because of that like goes into the realm of like language loss, culture loss. It's like there is no agency in learning Navajo, like from a practical standpoint. If you're not going to live on the reservation or you don't think it's going to benefit your kids or your family, like there's more credibility in learning another language, like Mandarin, Spanish. And so like
Yeah,
once again that goes along preference, and it's like this is a whole other podcast episode, but I think it's interesting that you say that because it's like those connections are all over the place.
yeah,
But
but I think again, you have to be careful to strive and be strong enough to maintain that part of your identity.
mhm.
I mean, I think of my grandfather. I mean, like just yesterday was the Remembrance Day thing, and like I think of my grandfather, who went to boarding school, and oh man, the man struggles sometimes with his identity. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
He's very confused sometimes. I can tell of how he's supposed to be. You know what I mean? And I don't know. 21st century natives, you and me, our generation, and the others to come, we're placed at a very unique time for indigeneity. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? We're learning Navajo. It'll be more of a luxury rather
A
than an
necessity.
actual a necessity. You know what
Yep.
I mean? And the only reason like for my son, the only reason he'd be speaking it is just simply to preserve the language and the traditions.
Same.
And it's hard, It's just it's a
Because
it's a for
you're doing it for reasons that make sense to nobody else other than you and your family.
hmm and I would argue it's a pretty intense burden to have.
It is.
And it's something that I would argue that the rest of colonized America doesn't necessarily have to deal with much. I mean, because my wife, she is black, right? And we talk about this stuff all the time. And she says,
Mm,
like, black culture is technically still evolving because Africans, when they were taken here, they lost everything, like of their African heritage, right? And so their descendants started forming new cultural norms, language, food, all of that, music. And natives, though, we're the opposite. We're like struggling to keep our traditions and stuff alive. And so I don't know. For me, as an artist and as a filmmaker, yeah, I don't know. Is am I? It's hard because it's like, well, do I want to be? the Navajo or Native filmmaker all the time, or do I just want to be a filmmaker who happens to be Native? And again, that's something that I think every artist and every Native person in general is going to have to figure out and navigate. It's a hard thing to navigate.
It's really hard. Going back to your grandpa, talking about your grandpa, my Che, he went through boarding school as well. He's still alive, thankfully. He's 90 now. Just turned 90 a few months ago. And I remember when I was in high school, there was an article in the Navajo Times. Like, we grew up in the same house. So I lived with my grandparents and my parents. We all lived in the same trailer. And he was reading it. So, like, it was his routine because he was retired at this point. And in his routine, every morning he would read the Navajo Times or the Navajope Observer. And I can't remember which newspaper it was, but they had a full page article. It wasn't an article. It was like it was a story. And I can't remember. It was like a nonprofit that put it up, but it was a picture of this Navajo girl where it was like split and her pictures were like conjoined. One half she was like wearing regular street clothes and the other half she was wearing a rug dress and like had the coral necklace on and everything and the whole garb and the sash belt. And it just was like a couple of paragraphs talking about like living in two worlds. And it wasn't really anything that profound to me because I had like been growing up and learned about that and heard people talk about two worlds. But I remember I was in high school and my grandpa, he like stopped me, almost like, you not going anywhere until you answer this question. He made me sit down, and he always made me sit down when he wanted me to talk to him, but he made me sit down and he like pointed the newspaper, he like turned it toward me and he like pushed it toward me. He was like, is this you? Like, do you does this make sense to you? And I'm like, yeah, grandpa, like I understand that completely. Yeah, that's me every day. And I remember him telling me like, man, that's really hard, isn't it? And like, it didn't register to him. I think for him, he just thought I was so past like being Navajo that I was just like, he plays video games, he watches TV all day, he does this, like he doesn't speak Navajo. He just didn't register to him that I still wrestle with being Navajo,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like really hurt him because he understood that pain. And he was just like, almost like, fuck, my grandson has to go through this too, He's like, that's why I didn't want his parents to learn Navajo. That's why I didn't want him to learn Navajo, because I thought he could be past this. And it's just like, man, wild stuff. And so,
well, it's ironic that I would argue, I don't want to compare, but I talked to some friends who come from immigrant families, and they kind of do that as well.
yeah, I can see that.
Navigate two worlds, like so many Hispanic families that come here who don't teach their children Spanish at all because like, hey, like, well, we're in the US, you need to know English.
And you don't want them to have an accent. You don't want them to be judged,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the same. I'd say it's pretty much in similar things that go on with, my parents, my grandparents, and even me sometimes. I have a white voice. I call it my white voice. It sounds so bad, but like,
no, I call
it my white voice, when I'm at work and stuff. And
absolutely.
When I go back home, I'm like, damn, it's all rezzed out.
And get all rugged.
All johned out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You get johned out, you talk res, it's code switching in a way. You do it different. When you talk to your bros and you talk to your friends from back home, and it's like, it's exhausting. And so that's why like I'm so happy that podcasts exist, YouTube exists, because you hear Black influencers talk about it, you hear Hispanic influencers talk about it. And like, because once again, going back to your native coding, we see ourselves in other people's struggles and other people's plight and other people's triumphs, that we like glom onto that, and we're like, okay, I can see myself. It's funny because
growing up, it was so fascinating to me that everyone around me just like loved Black media. It was so funny to me.
It's the closest thing we had, man.
Yeah, it really was. Like, all the kids that grew up, they would love watching any type, like, Friday. They would quote Friday all the time.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And the Medea movies and all these ones, like, it was so fascinating to me.
I talk about all the time. It's like Selena, Blood In, Blood Out, Friday. Like, you have all these like Boys in the Hood. There's so many of these films that we could that resonated with us, or that were close enough, I should say. Because like, I wasn't gonna watch Growing Pains, I watched Fresh Prince and I watched Family Matters because it's like they're brown people and they talk about being brown, and the struggles of being brown. and or at least black in their case. And it was hard because we never saw that. We never got that. So we glommed on to anything that was close enough. And hip hop culture, same thing. I think that's why there's such a prominent goth culture in our community, because it's so counterculture and it's so different.
Yep. I mean, I'm a metalhead. I grew up listening to metal all the time, and it's just funny to me because like my wife, I told you my wife is black, right? And metal in the black community is very it's not as prominent, and she thinks it's she associates metal with like
white people,
angsty white people.
Yeah.
But then for me, I literally don't have that connotation at all. It's weird. I just don't. It's just it was everyone around me in high school wore Slipknot and Metallica t-shirts and Lamb of God t-shirts and stuff, and I went to
Lamb
those shows.
Of God. Yeah, you walk around with like Sepultura stickers and shit. Like, you see that all over the place. Yep.
And it's like when you think about it, you don't think about the artists necessarily behind the music. It's about the music to you, and it's like
absolutely.
When I think of Metallica, I don't think about three white guys and a Mexican guy. I don't think about that at all. I think about the music, and it's just fascinating to me how in natives we have done our best to just latch on to anything that we could help identify with. And I don't know, I'm curious to see where we go in our culture. Specifically, like I would say specifically Navajo, like where we're going with it. I heard it's I don't know if you've heard, but like there was this thesis thrown around a long time ago, like Navajos are adapters to change, and I've heard Pueblo people complain and say that Navajos steal our ceremonies and steal our songs and stuff like that. But it's just I'm curious, Navajos in particular were very, I would say we are legitimately adaptable.
Right.
But at the same time, we value tradition. It's just weird dichotomy that we struggle with all the time. So I'm curious to see where we go with it and how, in particular, media affects that. And I look at music, I look at art, and obviously the stuff that we put out there. We I don't know. I'm just curious. It's fascinating to see where it goes.
I struggle with that too when thinking about my son. And we have another one on the way. My kids are gonna see a different world than I grew up in, and I hope it's for the better. And I hope they don't have periods of their life where they hate themselves as long as I did. I feel like every Native person has gone through a period where they wish they weren't Native because they see it as like a barrier. They see it as like, if only I wasn't born Native. If I was born white, I wouldn't have to worry about any of this crap,
Or they see it as dirty.
Mm-hmm.
I've have friends who think that they associate being Navajo with because I differentiate between Res culture and Navajo culture, and I think they mix it up and they feel like
they see it one and the same.
They see it one and the same, and they disassociate, and they're like, I don't want to identify as being Navajo because I guess they feel like it's lowly, or they feel like it's not sophisticated enough.
I mean, just what we say, like being Johnny, being John, it's just like, that's like the super res, deep res part of it, where it's like, you don't want that because it's like the connotations are uneducated. The connotations are like really ignorant,
uncivilized.
And it's like uncivilized. Yeah, exactly. Even within our own people, we have that kind of like lateral oppression going on for sure. And I hope that my son doesn't have that same struggle. I don't know. You just hope the best for your kids, because
for sure.
I know what it felt like to grow up and like feel like you weren't seen, you weren't heard, and like Navajo was like the worst thing you could possibly be in this world, and like wish you could strip that part away from you because you saw it as like a barrier to existing, to succeeding in this world. And it's like, that's why like Reservation Dogs, I'm happy that he's 2 and this came out, because for him it's gonna be like, oh, that old show. I'm excited to see 10 years down the road, he's going to have like Spirit Rangers coming out on Netflix. He's going to have like Molly from Denali, he's going to have all these kids shows catered with a lens for Native kids. And it's going to be amazing. So I'm so excited for it.
Exactly.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Talk to you later.
Talk to you.